and let's talk about the movie of the week, the movie that probably will take a lot of nominations at the Oscars. Like last year, or this year, I should say, Dune had like a dozen nominations like at the Oscars. It was almost like a shared record, I believe. Although it mostly won the technical awards, it didn't really win any of like the big acting and directing awards. Killers of the Flower Moon looks like it will be a heavy contender in a lot of the big awards. Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro and especially Lily Gladstone looks like, breakout for this from this movie. They all are likely going to get nominated in their respective categories. Mm-hmm. Martin Scorsese might get not only nominated, but he might win his second directing Oscar. The first one he won for The Departed. And so it's been almost like 2 decades now since that has happened. And he had high hopes of The Irishman, but it looks like that movie underperformed at the Oscars. Definitely, like it was nominated for like a ton of things, and it won like I think 1 or 2 things. So this movie as a whole, it's sparking a lot of conversation and a lot of good conversations about a subject matter that historically has been repressed, especially in its retellings over the years, whether it's over a radio play or even in the writing of the book that this movie is based on. It seems like Martin Scorsese tried to even draw even more attention to Lily Gladstone's character in this movie. So I wanted to ask, both of you guys went and saw this film. So I'll ask you guys, like, just give me your review. And Bridget, I'll start with you. Like, what did you think about Killers of the Flower Moon? Does it really live up to the hype? And how did you deal with like the really long running time?
Well, I really had to pee, but I also didn't want to miss any of it. So it did get a little uncomfortable that last 30 minutes. I was like, when is it going to end? But, I had a lot of mixed feelings about it. I do remember leaving feeling like, and, especially with a lot of the marketing too, was like, it's Scorsese's best film, Leonardo DiCaprio's best performance. So I really was, I had really high hopes for it. But, I know we talked about it a little bit before. I just feel like the ending, and it was really long too, but I just feel like the conclusion didn't really do it for me. I found myself afterwards Googling like more of the information because it was based on a true story and really comparing the details in the movie to what really happened in real life. And I think for me that actually kind of made it better. I even read an interview with one of the main characters' granddaughters talking about it and her perceptions in the movie. And I don't know, I think hearing that for me was kind of a good conclusion to it because, it was an interesting end.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think part of a movie, the purpose of one of the reasons why this movie exists, or I think at least what Martin Scorsese has intended, is for this to draw more attention to the subject matter at hand, like all these murders, which they called the Reign of Terror at the time of the Osage Nation. And it's kind of historically, again, like the narrative has around it has been either suppressed or been like the story quite hasn't been told with with the appropriate level of attention and detail as it should have. Certainly, with regard to how they've sort of underplayed all the violence and then how much they destroyed basically almost this entire society just for the sake of like oil and money, which isn't the first time we've heard this story. Obviously, this throughout the history of America and any colonial society over the years, whether it was the British or any other empire. And it has happened over and over in different parts of the world. And this movie seeks to kind of bring attention to it. And I think the fact that we're having these kind of conversations and you had the inkling to go in and do more research, I think is a good sign because that means that it has had the intended effect. So Angelina, I want to ask you now, like, what did you think about it? And did you end up like after the movie kind of ruminating on what you had just seen on the screen? Because there's not every movie like leaves you thinking, but this one, it seems like it does.
So, this is definitely, 3.5 hours of complex, you've got an incredibly sad story. You've got incredible actors. You have a director that knows how to tell a story. I feel like Martin Scorsese, if anything, is known for his storytelling. Like he truly lays it out so that you can't avoid the point. And I definitely, Leonardo did such a great job that all I've thought about basically today, I did go see the movie earlier today, was his character real? Was his character genuine. How complicit was he? Did he love her at all? So it definitely makes you ask so many different questions. My mother is part Native American, and we come from the Cherokee Choctaw tribes. It's not surprising. It's so sad. The story of Native Americans, like across America, everywhere, it's always the same story of no matter what, there was so much genocide and people just looked away from it, and they have for a long time. So, I think it's really important it's a really important story that he's telling. It definitely makes you think. It's really long. I had to go pee twice. I think I have to re-watch it again. I won't rewatch it in theaters because it's really long.
It is really long.
The kid
Yeah.
next to me literally got up and left like 2 hours in. I was having a girls' night last night in which one of my best friend's boyfriends literally walked out of the movie and called her while I was there. I was like, "That's terrible. That's a terrible sign." And he was like, "It's fine. I think you'll appreciate it as an actor, but yeah, I'm tired. I'm going home." I was like, "Great, cool." So it's definitely one of those movies that I wouldn't go to a showtime after 8 p.m. because you will fall asleep, possibly. It's very slow, too, which is also an editing. You really need to have patience to really soak in every piece of this movie. He takes his time. And there was a quote from one of the top critics that kind of outlined how I felt about the movie, in the sense that I think this might have been better served as like a long form TV show. I feel like it was a lot to pack into one movie.
Yeah, I think there's certainly some truth to that. Like, it's maybe make it a multi-part series instead of making it like this really long movie. Now, the runtime of this movie is like 3 hours 26 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, another movie this year that came out which had a really long runtime, which was also a talking point, but that movie managed to still become, I believe, the third highest grossing movie of the year, is of course Oppenheimer. That movie was basically 3 hours on the dot. And people talked about how like was this a very long movie, and it also was kind of slow in parts, but at the end of the day, you walked away with this like immersive experience that kind of took you on this really long journey. But at 3.5 hours, I mean,
Oppenheimer didn't feel as long. I'll be honest.
Well, it wasn't. It was 26 minutes shorter too.
Okay,
So,
yeah,
naturally.
there's something about the last 20, 30 minutes. I checked my clock. I was like, I have to pee again. Like, I don't know what's going on. It's starting to slow down. They still have a lot of story left to tell. There's something about the runtime of this movie, the way it's paced.
By the time of the interrogation, I was like, oh my gosh, just lock him up.
Yeah, it's like, oh, we've got to strap in for a little bit longer. So it definitely, comparatively, yes, right. But I feel like Oppenheimer was slightly faster paced, especially towards the end.
And I think part of that has to do with Christopher Nolan, I think, is the master of pacing in movies.
Mm-hmm.
And every single one of his movies are paced so well that you can almost, because that's why his movies have, I think, won like more editing awards than most other directors of like, his level, certainly like with his level of masterfulness into the storytelling. And that's because you look at his movies and you can almost, like, there's basically no fat to cut. Like, it's everything that you see needs to be there for the story to make sense. He's very good at making that. And that's basically what good pacing is. Like, I think to this day, The Dark Knight is probably the most perfectly paced movie, period, if not like, and it's certainly the Christopher Nolan's most perfectly paced film. And that's how, even when those movies are like 2.5, 3 hours long, they keep you captivated, they keep you interested. With this movie, of course, you also have to, like, if you went and saw the trailers, you're like in for almost 4 hours. So it's like you're gonna have to like basically give up half of your day to this experience.
You know what, I kind of met you last week where you were saying the trailer filled you with a sense of dread. And I was like, I don't get that from the trailer. I got that from the movie because it was so slow in its pacing. It built up like a residual sort of anxiety and dread.
This movie felt like, to me, like watching the trailer, like, okay, I don't know if this is a fair comparison because to me, it felt like this is almost like a Western. Obviously, it's like a historical epic, but it's like a Western, almost like watching Unforgiven, or like these movies where you know it's going to be a tragedy and you're working your way up. It's slowly but surely going somewhere where you know it's going to end up, but it's going to get you there anyway. So it's not really that there's a twist coming so much as you're in it for the journey and the emotional impact of it. And also like some of like all these kind of movies always test the moral boundaries of what the characters are engaged in, as well as how we perceive what the characters are engaged in, and what we take away from it. And a lot of that has to do with the fact, I think, a lot of the really great directors working today and in the history of Hollywood and filmmaking in general, they're all masters of the subtext. And I think the trailer the marketing on this was good because the trailers gave you a lot of that subtext, and that's really where the dread comes from. And I know you guys already brought this up, but we were talking about this before we started, the show, that there's a lot of subtext involved in Leonardo DiCaprio's performance alone with regard to like what his intentions and his complicitness to this entire reign of terror was. And so Bridget, like how much of that did you feel while watching the movie? Like, and where did you land on did you think that DiCaprio's character was truly complicit in all of this, or was it mostly being driven by his uncle, played by Robert De Niro?
It's so hard. It's like the devil and the angel on the shoulder in deciding, like, was he really ill-intentioned? Was he good? Just from his performance as the character, I don't know. We were kind of talking about how simple-minded he seems, and I can't help but wonder if maybe he is, in the beginning. And I guess to me, to justify it in him, sticking along this long, having the balls to kill his wife and all this stuff. It's like, if he really loved her, how could he do that? It's like, you're just trying to like do the math. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. So it's like, I think it made me feel like he was maybe at that point where it was like, I am stuck between a hard place and a rock with his uncle, and that maybe he got into it under, those circumstances of not really understanding. But then at that point where he felt like, well, if I don't kill her, maybe it's me next. That's all I could.
And I also even want to throw in there, I honestly wonder if Leonardo DiCaprio walked into this, read this script, and said, I don't know what his intentions are, and I'm going to play it like that, because that's almost how it comes off. It's almost as if even Leonardo DiCaprio doesn't know.
Yeah, well, I will say this. Although I don't know how much of this is true or how much of that, like, you're nailing it on the head, but to be fair, like Martin Scorsese on the press tour for this movie has said that they not only they after like working on the script with Eric Roth, his co-screenwriter, they after a couple of years of working on the script, they did some changes, made some changes to it because it seemed like there were some pacing concerns and like it felt like it was even more drawn out than maybe like you guys found it to be potentially. And part of that was because Leo kind of came in and he was like, well, we need to hear some suggestions I've got for you. I'm pretty sure Leonardo DiCaprio is an executive producer on this too.
He is, yep.
So I think he had some sway and some say in that. And then Scorsese was also mentioned in one of his interviews that Leonardo DiCaprio did a lot of improvisation, ad-libbing on the spot. And and then at one point, like Scorsese and De Niro just kind of exchanged looks and were like, why? What is he doing? And he told DiCaprio, like, hey, like, you don't need to say that dialogue. Like, we don't need this. Like, it's just go with what's there. So maybe you're right in the sense that there was some. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't like he didn't have conversations about like, well, what are my intentions? Like, that's the kind of thing that actors and directors do literally all the time on set. That's the whole point of their. Yeah.
But I can also see, once you see the movie, you can weigh in on this. We can talk about it next week. In a way, his performance is so confusing and so what seems to be genuine and then disingenuous and then complicit and then not complicit. I almost wonder if he purposefully did not decide on what his intentions were as that character.
And you know what the thing
I
is?
almost feel like it was like an intentional decision.
And isn't that like, so I know you mentioned this before the recording. Isn't that like frustrating as a viewer to kind of like sit there? Like, what was your like gut reaction for, I guess, both of you? Like, how were you feeling watching this movie? Like,
Mad.
reacting to what's going on?
I was mad. One of my biggest pet peeves in life is stupid people. I know that, okay, I'm going to just preface that with like people making decisions that they have to know are going to end so poorly. And yet he just kept making terrible decision after terrible decision after terrible decision. And then all of a sudden, spoiler alert, he tries to murder his wife. And then, spoiler alert, then he almost gets murdered. It's like, dude, you didn't see that? It makes me mad. Sorry, I was mad. That's how I felt.
In some ways, I also feel like, I mean, there are people, you hear about stories in the news and you're like, oh my God, how the heck did that happen? How did they, especially when people, are in very manipulative relationships. I feel like maybe that was something, is that power of, because I did feel that was the pressure that maybe he was under and feeling.
The power dynamic was definitely not on his side. Yeah.
Always trying to please his uncle, but maybe it's just being a people pleaser in his life and kind of not, and then getting to that point where it's like now it's against his own, his own interest, but still knowing what to do.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true because the trailers, like, again, I'm going referencing the trailer because not having seen the movie, was what seems like absolute genius in hindsight is the fact that a lot of what you're saying, the trailers kind of give you a preview of that. Like, having just watched the trailers, like, that's exactly the impression that I got, that this one person who's out of his depth is stuck in this really manipulative relationship where it's and this also reminds me, I think I made this comparison rightly so last week previewing this movie, that like Scorsese's made The Departed, and Leonardo DiCaprio was in The Departed, and he was kind of in a similar situation. Actually, his character wasn't exactly in the same situation. I would say it was more so Matt Damon's character was kind of like what Leo's character in this movie is, and then Jack Nicholson's character plays like the mob boss, which in this case would be like the De Niro equivalent. And it was basically like he was kind of like, and then there's a love triangle almost involved in that. But basically the dynamics are kind of similar. So I think Scorsese probably looked at the material and said, like, I've done this before. And maybe I'm not saying that's the only reason why they drew him to this project, but that was one thing where like he's a master at kind of like showing that that abstract nature of that, also just kind of leaving you on the edge without really committing to one side or the other, and letting maybe the actors, the characters' actions do the talking. Because this movie feels like it kind of, it's gut wrenching because you're sitting there and you're engaged in this and you almost want to like jump into the fray and be like, shake this person and to their senses.
And I would also say another thing. I mean, this movie really does make you think, which absolutely is going to make it an Oscar contender. I have not felt this way about a movie since Oppenheimer. Prior to Oppenheimer, I hadn't felt this way about a movie in a long time. It's definitely a super masterful work, but even the pacing almost feels like an analogy for Hale's long game of manipulation. This man was like the mastermind of all of these murders, but he did it so insanely masterfully, slowly, over years and years and years. I mean, truly, he was so sort of embedded in the Osage's community. He spoke the language. He was like a part of the town. He gave them streets. He gave them this. He like brought civilization to the Osage community.
People called him the Osage King of the Hills or something in real life.
Exactly. And you knew with the way he talked about it that it was his plan all along to get into the tribe and take all of the money. Like 100%. You have no doubt about that. But
And I think like too, like, I think actually like for me, the most unsettling point in the whole movie, I can't remember if it was Minnie, the character that he talks to at the wedding, and he goes to her and he's like talking to her and saying a prayer and telling her things are going to be okay, but you know that something is wrong by the way she's
very off.
Like, oh my God, like that feeling of like he's got everyone wrapped around his finger, and it's like that's that horrible feeling of being trapped and not being able to say anything because no one will believe you. He's a member of their tribe now, and it's horrifying.
Yeah, it's like really crazy.
Yeah.
So in a way, the pacing again like feels almost like an analogy for his like long-term plan, which is something I thought about after the fact.
Yeah, and a lot of what you're describing like sounds like mob boss tactics. Like, he's pulling all the strings without making it seem like he's complicit in anything, and he's the one, like if you try to go ask for help, he's gonna be the one, like up front he's gonna say, hey, I'm gonna do everything I can to help you, but behind the scenes he's the one causing all the strife in the first place.
The crazy thing is too is they only find out that it's him because people are saying, oh, I did this because he did this, who told me that it was him, who it was Hale, but no one else had seen that before. Like obviously as the audience we know what's going on, but no one was aware really at all that he was doing this, and so it's just crazy.
Yeah, he just kind of like keeps himself a couple of steps removed from the actual like the dirty work that he's letting other people do. I wanted to kind of ask you like just what did you think about the ending? The ending of this movie is quite unconventional. It really changes tact from like the rest of the film, and it could be something that either takes you out of the whole experience completely, or you look at it and say maybe there was a message behind why it was set up this way. And Martin Scorsese actually like shows up on camera and he's in the movie itself. Not the first time we have seen him be in one of his movies, but this time it seems like it's even more like breaking the fourth wall than what's maybe we have known him for, right? Like, what did you guys think about the ending of the film?
I didn't love it. It wasn't my favorite. I felt like it kind of took me out of the storyline. I saw that what they were trying to do, but in a way it sort of like removes you from the emotional ties that you've been building for 3 hours and 10 minutes at this point, or 3 hours and 20 minutes at this point, because it really only is like the last, like, I want to say 5 to 10 minutes where they're sort of summarizing these people's final days of their lives and their conclusions. And the way they choose to do it is like, I don't know, I think in a way I would have preferred like a off-screen narrator and being able to still see the character on screen. But it's a new way to do it, I guess. I haven't seen this format in anything other than a play. So it's very stage tactic.
It's the way you described it, and again, having not seen the movie, I may be, describing it, or maybe getting the wrong impression. But like, I went and saw a movie from Wes Anderson earlier this year, which in the moment I'm forgetting like what it was called, but it was basically it was kind of like a stage play made into a movie, and it was about like involving aliens, and there was.
Oh, you're talking about Asteroid City?
Asteroid City, that's it. Yes, Asteroid City, where every so often you would see like some like Bryan Cranston's character, almost like. He's like the narrator on stage, just kind of like standing off to the side, and he's the voice of God kind of thing while you see events play out on stage. Mm-hmm. So every once in a while, he would pop in front of the camera and like literally looking at you, breaking the fourth wall and saying, and then now this happened, and then that happened, and so on and so forth. And then we jump back into the narrative, almost like it was purposefully like taking you away from the immersion of the story itself. And I felt like the way you guys described it that's kind of how this felt.
In a way, but it was also such a swift break. There was no back and forth. We never saw this format in the whole entirety of the 3 hour, 26-minute movie. And then 3 hours and 10 to 15 minutes in, we get cut to a stage with new radio broadcaster actors who we've never seen before now narrating the summarization of these people's lives and the conclusion to the story we have just witnessed and seen and taken part of. And they now summarize and use voice actors to sort of like wrap up the movie. It was kind of like, oh, I don't get to like take part in that. Like, I feel like I felt a little robbed.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It
How do you feel?
me, it kind of, yeah, it made it feel like, oh, this was all just a story, the end of a bedtime story, and these were the characters, and this is what happened. And it did feel like, even at one point it said like, yeah, like this was all based on a fabricated story. And so, and obviously we know it's true, but even in that moment it was like, oh, so like what really happened then? Like, was this real? Like, I don't know. It just, and even like saying, and then she died of diabetes, and then this happened. It just doesn't have the same effect, I think, when it's especially just random people who have no ties to this story at all. It's just, it's like, okay, we just woke up in this other world, and it just, yeah, you're right. It just didn't feel like it had that ending that we should have had.
Did you catch the age that she died at, which ties back into what Robert De Niro's character kept saying throughout the movie?
No, I can't remember.
So it was, I think that's why they said it, but they were like, she died of diabetes at 50 years old.
Right,
And
you're right.
throughout the whole movie, they kept saying, no Osage woman ever lives to be older than 50.
Yes, yes.
And I'm like, she won out through all of this. She survived being poisoned, and she still died before she got to turn 51. I'm like, what the?
Yeah, it's.
I was mad.
I didn't even catch that, but
Mm-hmm.
man, 50. Gosh, it's so young. But I didn't get that tie. You're right. It's like forces are always working against them, is what it seems.
Yeah.
It almost felt like because I was reading an article in Time about this where they kind of talked about the ending, and it feels like this was Scorsese's attempt to sort of model this on the previous retellings of this tragedy, where they downplayed all the terror and the violence and just really just almost like you can call it like not mass genocide, but like in a manner of speaking, they tried to like almost wipe out the Osage Nation, certainly enough to take all the money and the oil rights away from them, which it feels like what Scorsese is doing here is almost saying, hey, look, this is how it's been told throughout history, and it kind of ends on I think ends the movie, right, like with the line that he says, and something to do
I don't
with,
know. When does it become, what is the line between serial murder and genocide? I don't.
No, I was.
No, I
I'm
know, but
talking
I'm
about-
like, I'm almost like, it kind of
probably,
does
like,
feel like
taking it to the
genocide a bit. I was like, I don't
Because it
know
felt
where
like
that
they were trying to almost
line
wipe
is.
out the Osage Nation, but mass
Yeah.
murder and like the reign of terror, like I'll take that back if I misspoke in that
No,
sense.
I mean,
The wrong
it
context.
creates an interesting, especially with everything going on in the world right
Yeah.
now, it paints like a really interesting, where's the line between mass murder and genocide? You know what I mean? It's like,
I guess it's also you just when you watch the movie and whatever how you react to like the gravity of what happened, and
I guess because it doesn't all happen at once, but it is like a systemic wiping
Over
out of
time.
the people over time. So I'm like,
Exactly.
I think it does quantify as genocide.
Yeah, or I mean, okay, again, like not trying to get political, but like you could even refer to it as like almost like ethnical cleansing, which because they're trying to remove these people from the land that they own, and by killing them off over time slowly rather than doing it like in one go. So there's a lot of subtlety to that. Yeah.
It's interesting too, because reading up on the history, it was like, they were forced to move, I think, from Kansas. And it said like 90% of the population was lost just during that migration. And they come to this land. And then it's like, and then it's like for once things are in their favor. They have this oil, but then it's still a curse to them. And they still are targeted and, still continue to get wiped out by this. And it's
They call it white man's money because oil is only really wanted by the white man. It was honestly, this movie is really like, it's a good movie, guys. It makes you think. It really paints a really scary picture of our politics. It paints a really scary picture about America and its inception, and the gold rush, the oil rush, all of this. It was not, I mean, we've always known that like America is super corrupt, but this paints a really big picture of how corrupt it truly was.
It's like growing up and going reading history books in school. You don't really necessarily even like when we were going through school. I'm sure like we in our textbooks we didn't quite get this level of visceral detail, and it seemed like we got like the.
Did you guys ever read The Jungle? It's actually one of my favorite novels of all time, but it paints a very similar picture of New York City in the late 1800s, during the Industrial Revolution, right before Teddy Roosevelt. Right before Teddy Roosevelt became president and started like clearing things up. But you guys should read it. But it's a very similar historical picture as this movie paints in a different way. But no, our history books don't talk about this. As growing up first generation in America, like full generation in America, they don't tell you about any of this.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think that, and that's part of like the way this movie ends. I think it's sort of calling attention to that. Mm-hmm. The fact that he ends with saying, that they're talking about her obituary in this movie, and I think it ends with like there was no mention of the murders in her, but like the way the Molly story has been told over time, they've always sort of suppressed a lot of the literally this absolute tragedy that happened.
Yeah.
And even now, I feel like Scorsese's trying to say, "Hey, I did as good a job as I did, but maybe even I didn't do enough." And then now it's up. He's kind of passing the baton on to the viewers to kind of go and maybe like you guys clearly did, like do some research, look this up, and really learn more about it, so that way we are aware of what happened, so that way we don't let it happen again. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, part of the message of this movie. Which is why I think the ending works in a certain way, but also, like you said, like from a dramatic narrative momentum standpoint, it probably does work counter to that too.
I also think this is such a pivotal movie now. I mean, even still, because so many tribes are still fighting for like proper education and funding, and there's so many murders on reservations. People will cross over into reservation lines to commit murder so that it can get away from the federal government. I mean, there are so many counts of tribal women being murdered. It's like actually one of the biggest tolls, like death tolls in America, is literally reservation tribal people being murdered on their own land by non-tribal people. It's really sad.
I was watching a Vice documentary about this, I think earlier, either this year or late last year, and it's almost like an epidemic unto itself, like with how often this happens, and then how little we know about it, how little coverage it gets in the news, and so it's again another example of these stories need to be told so that people are aware of what's going on, so that not only do we remember what has happened, but also we don't let those things happen again. And I hope that this brings attention to like exactly what you just said. Even just watching this review, I hope this draws more attention to what's going on in the here and the now, not just what has happened in the past. Because again, like as the saying goes, if we don't learn from our history, then we're doomed to repeat it. So look, guys, we can keep talking about this movie. I'm sure we'll discuss this again in the future, certainly around Oscar time. Killers of the Flower Moon is out in theaters now. If you went and saw it, let us know in the comments below what you thought about it. And if you haven't seen it, maybe this review did convince you to go see it, even though it is 3.5 hours long. Maybe you'll make the trip out. And then if you do, then of course, come back and let us know what you thought about it. And like and subscribe for more content like this. We review movies each and every week. And I'm sure we'll be reviewing more movies like this in the days, weeks, and months to come.